The story of the loyal dog staying at his owner's grave for days on end left everyone mystified. Funeral ceremonies evoke feelings of sadness and loss for all those involved, including the animals who have to cope with their human's absence. Oftentimes, family members take in these animals or they are given to a shelter with the hope of finding them a new and loving home. Nevertheless, Sergeant distinguished himself from other dogs. He was a German shepherd that adored everyone he encountered. Initially, Sergeant had been trained to be a police dog, and that is where he met his handler, a 32-year-old officer named Ian. When Sergeant Ian had his initial meeting, he had only been a police officer for 2 years yet was already passionate about working with dogs and law enforcement. When Ian finally met his four-legged partner, he couldn't have been happier. The police officer and sergeant headed off right away and were quickly trained to respond to each other in all kinds of situations. Ian and Sergeant spent lots of time together, and the four-legged canine even came to live with his handler. That way they could always be in tune with one another should an emergency happen, and they were called in. But as time went by, Ian came to love Sergeant as if he was a member of his own family. The two would end up doing everything together, from sleeping on the sofa to taking long walks in the park. When the dog was off duty, he loved to play with everyone the two came across on their walks. One day, Ian and Sergeant were sitting in a patrol car when all of a sudden, a call came through over the radio about a robbery that was happening close by. Ian immediately started the car sirens up and began to make his way to the scene. The police officer had been told over the radio that he would be pursuing two suspects who had attempted to rob a nearby house but had been spotted by the owner. Ian arrived at the scene only to see the two suspects running away on foot. The man drove after the criminals, determined to catch up with them and arrest them, but just as he was about to get close enough to stop them, the two men ran into some nearby woods. Ian stopped the car and looked into the woods. Due to how close Ian had been to the scene of the crime, he had been the first to arrive at the location. This meant that he didn't have any backup apart from Sergeant, who had been barking from the back of the car the entire time that they had been in pursuit of the criminals. Ian knew that he shouldn't go after the two men, as he didn't know what they could be armed with, and he had no one to back him up should he find himself in a bad situation. But at the same time, he didn't want to let the two dangerous men get away so that they could potentially hurt other innocent people. Taking a deep breath, Ian opened the car door and called his canine to his side before the two of them ventured into the woods. Ian ran through the dense trees following Sergeant, who had picked up on the scent of the two men. A few moments later, Ian heard one of the men muttering to himself just a few feet ahead of him. The officer got out his gun and began to silently creep closer to the unsuspecting man. Ian told the canine to stay where he was as he didn't want to risk the dog getting hurt. But as the policeman made his way into the small clearing where the criminal was, he realized there was only one man standing there. Just as Ian was about to look around for the second man, he felt an incredibly sharp pain in his side. It turned out that the second man had snuck up on the police officer and hurt him with a knife. Sensing his handler's distress, Sergeant charged into the clearing, ready to help however he could. The feisty canine immediately began to attack the two men. He bit the one who injured his owner and did not let go of the man's arm no matter what the criminal did to try and get him off. Eventually, the second man came over and managed to pry the angered canine off of his partner with a large branch. Sergeant was injured in the process. Finally, the two criminals ran off into the woods, once more away from the sound of coming police sirens. Sergeant made his way over to his fallen owner, but Ian was gravely injured. The loyal canine began to bark to help lead the backup police officers to their location. Once the two injured police officers were found, they were rushed to the nearest hospital to be treated. Sadly though, Ian's injuries were too severe and he passed away. With his handler gone, Sergeant fell into a deep depression. The canine did not know what to do and didn't want to interact with anyone else. He was deemed unfit for duty due to his mental state, and the saddened pup was given to Ian's family so that he could live out the rest of his life with people he knew and loved. Not long after Sergeant was sent to live with Ian's family, the day came for the police officer to be buried. Everyone from the police station, along with Ian's family and Sergeant, attended the funeral, and as the man's coffin was lowered into the ground, Sergeant began to bark and whine as if asking for his owner to get up and give him a cuddle like he used to. Sadly, it was not meant to be. As the funeral came to an end, Ian's family began to make their way towards the car to go home when his wife, Shelley, noticed that Sargent was missing. Not wanting to lose another beloved family member, Shelley went in search of the canine. Eventually, she found him lying down next to Ian's grave. Shelley tried to coax Sargent away from the grave, but nothing the woman said or did got the dog to move. Eventually, she tried to grab the canine's collar to get him to go with her. However, when she reached for him, Sargent began to growl. It was clear that no one was going to get him to move from his master's grave that night. Not knowing what else to do, Shelley left the dog at Ian's graveside, believing that she would be able to pick him back up the next day. However, the next morning, Sargent was just as determined to stay at the grave as he had been the night before. Over the next few days, the loyal dog did not move from his spot. Shelley would return twice a day to make sure that the dog had something to eat and drink, before leaving the heartbroken pup to guard his lost owner. One day, as Sargent was guarding his deceased owner, one of Ian's friends from the police, a man called Scene, approached the grave to drop off some flowers and some food for the dog. But as Scene stood at Ian's grave, Sargent suddenly began to growl. For the first time in days, the dog stood up and moved away from the grave and towards two voices which the canine could hear coming from the street. Curious, Scene followed the agitated pup until he was able to see what had upset the dog, walking along the road with the two men who had injured Sargent and Ian. Upon noticing the criminal, Sargent immediately leaped into action and bit into the leg of one of the unsuspecting men. The man screamed in terror and fell to the pavement, where the angry canine was able to keep him pinned down with the threat of biting his neck. The second criminal tried to make a run for it, but was quickly stopped by Scene, who was able to subdue and handcuff him. Before long, the two criminals were arrested and taken back to the police station. Sargent went to Ian's grave, emptied one final wine before going back to Scene. It seemed the pup had kept its promise of seeking justice for Ian's death by tracking down the perpetrators. Through the brave and amazing actions of Sargent, two criminals were successfully put behind bars. This enabled the police officer to live a peaceful life with Shelley, while still visiting Ian's grave regularly. Thanks to this dog, Sargent was able to receive the closure he deserved. Please share your thoughts about the story with us in the comments and hit the like and subscribe button to get more captivating stories.